Like at least like people would probably want to stay for like the taping like
Why is it not allowing
Oh,
us to?
the lights flickered. The router might be resetting for the split.
Does that happen?
Yeah.
Oh, it's in airplane mode.
guys, if it starts
It happens at home.
you don't have to run.
But every time our lights go out at home, is it in airplane mode?
It was.
There we go. I know these lights go in airplane mode.
It does that.
All right, try the clicker.
Should I close the door?
Let me see really quickly. Please. Thank you. Sorry.
Smack it shut.
No, don't.
Good job. Oh, cool. Yes, this is the thing.
Wonderful weather we're having.
Dude, I love it.
Shrek dies in England.
Okay, here you go.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, whenever the timer's ready, you're ready.
TOK doesn't exist.
Or whatever.
Okay. Here's the top. Okay. Hello, you will know my name is Ben, and this is my TOK presentation on cultural influence and how that applies to knowledge. So I'm going to dive right into my knowledge question. Is not my knowledge question, my real life example, which is a speech given by one of my personal idols, Dean Kamen. He's a very famous inventor, and he gave an incredible speech at the 1998 First Robotic Kickoff, which detailed how in our Western culture, many kids are given a great access to media, right? And the media tends to highlight and focus on certain figures and activities. And as Dean says, imagine how many kids would spend those kinds of hours practicing basketball if there was no Michael Jordan. The certain figure and activity that he's pointing out here is sports. Many kids, through the media, are given a great access to sports stars and sport itself. And these activities gain great influence across our culture. He then goes on to say that the harsh reality is this country doesn't have an NCAA of smarts or Olympic Committee of brains. We don't have people as well known as Michael Jordan doing little things like inventing CAT scanners, curing diseases, and putting a man on the moon. What he's trying to say here is that the media tends to focus very heavily on these sports figures and sport activities. And he's throughout the speech, he contrasts this with the coverage of STEM and modern STEM achievements and advancements. There is much less news coverage of these STEM achievements in the news and the media than there is of sports, which are happening almost 24/7 year-round. And so these sports are then given access to influence these young kids who are seeing this on the media. And this cultural influence of the media brings me to my knowledge question, which is, how can culture influence the creation of new knowledge? To unpack this a little bit, I'm going to be saying that culture is anything from the media, social norms, and stereotypes, and how that can influence the creation of new knowledge in certain areas. And knowledge in this case I'm saying is anything from a new song made by an artist, a study done by a scientist, or even a new set of plays developed by your football coach. So jumping back to the real life example, Dean later on in the speech goes on to say, you can't expect kids to get to 18 or 19 years old and decide, now I'm going to become capable of creating wealth or adding value. It's too late. Dean is saying that the Western culture's focus on sports in the media has begun to influence these kids from a young age. And so as a result, they start to practice and develop their skills in sports like the heroes and sports stars that they see in the media. However, once this builds their skill and knowledge in this sport area up to the point where they reach college. However, once they reach college, it's too late for them to go back and say, okay, now I'm going to start developing my skills in another area of knowledge or another area of skills. Their skills are generally in that area of knowledge, which is sports. So before we go any further, I'm going to introduce a question here, which is, how does cultural influence affect the value of certain areas of knowledge? So again, cultural influence here is more media, stereotypes, and social norms.
Well, I feel like naturally, just like based on whatever culture you're in, there's going to be a lot more value to certain areas of knowledge. For instance, in a way, say for instance, in China, there's going to be a lot more value to. In a way, there's going to be a lot more value to other areas of art besides other areas of knowledge besides history, because Chinese citizens aren't allowed to know a lot of the history of their country, and when they do, it is typically very bad for them, and they're persecuted by their government for that.
Yeah, I agree. And in certain other cultures, my presentation focuses mainly on the US culture, but even in Europe, there's a lot more focus on more, instead of tertiary producing goods like information systems, and that is more in the US. In Europe, there's a lot more focus on hands-on goods in production, like going and training to become a mechanic or like a plumber or something like that. And yeah, it can definitely change as culture shifts. So I guess I'll move on to my arguments here. We see two arguments sort of developing. On one hand, you can say that culture inhibits and restricts the creation of new knowledge. So by inspiring these kids to become focused in one certain area of knowledge, that you're limiting their ability to go out and develop knowledge in other areas. If a kid spends hours and hours practicing to be a basketball player, they're not, that's taking time away from them to be able to discover their own new sets of knowledge in natural sciences or human sciences or even arts. Whereas on the flip side, you could also argue that instead, culture focuses, refines, and enhances our creation knowledge in specific areas. So yes, while we do see that more resources are allocated to a certain area of knowledge to invest in that and develop the knowledge there, this produces a lot more heavy development of knowledge in that area. So again, going back to the example of sports, we see now we have play-by-play analysts at NFL games who are developing strategies on the fly as they're happening. We have the NFL draft that comes out, and in that draft, many high school and college level players are scouted out by the bigger clubs, and there's a lot more knowledge created about those players. And so we do see a lot more knowledge created, just in a much more refined area. So, going a step back, we're going to look at different perspectives in this issue, especially with the STEM issue. Around 50 years ago, women were greatly discouraged from pursuing academic and STEM careers. The perfect stereotypical housewife would just cook and clean. And as a result, many women did not enter the STEM workforce. And those that did, their contributions received much less attention than their male counterparts. As a result, there was a lack of knowledge about these women in STEM, and so the inspiration was not there for young girls to become inspired by and pursue their own career. And this is sort of cycle is what we're seeing the effects of today, where we know that there are way more men employed in STEM careers than women. By discouraging women from pursuing careers in STEM, we're essentially cutting out half of the potential knowledge of our population. Like 50% of the human race is women, and if we discourage them from entering the natural sciences, well, that's 50% less knowledge you could get, or perspective you could get in the natural sciences area. Yep.
It's pretty well known that in business and in politics, females have a very different approach to problem solving, and that the level of empathy that a woman brings, and we're talking obviously about binary men, women, I don't necessarily know what we would do with other identifications of gender, but women take a little bit more time, they don't react as quickly, and so female politicians and female business leaders typically react differently than their male counterparts, potentially more morally and ethically overall. What examples might you give about how women contribute differently in STEM now?
In STEM now?
Like the culture of being a woman and how that enhances.
Well, I'm going to jump out of STEM, I'm going to jump into politics like you said.
Okay.
But there's, I don't want to go into this, but we all know there's the debate around abortion, right? Whether women should have the right to abort baby or not, and whether this is against constitutional laws or like religious laws.
Mm-hmm.
But having a male majority population in like the House and the Senate, and they're making these policies that govern women's bodies, well, it's impossible for a man to know what it's like to have a child and go through that. And so, in a way, you're really restricting the ability to create true knowledge and like justifications with the laws that govern abortion if you're restricting half the population that it concerns from those arguments. And yeah, going on to second perspective, we have here socioeconomic. So some sports are a lot cheaper to play. For example, you can play basketball with a net and a ball and some friends. And as a result, many low-income areas might have greater access to sports instead of practicing things like science and technology. Because I can tell you that robots are very expensive. As a result, people that these kids see around them will be more focused on sports, and as a result, they'll develop those skills as well. The cultural influence in that local area will restrict them from going out and branching into other areas of knowledge. And that brings me to a question here: how can cultural influences shift at a local level? Anyone want to answer?
Well, I think that even with the sports example, we can kind of see like in different areas, even in the United States, there are different sports that are emphasized. And I think that I don't have like a specific example of a different. Well, I guess even at local levels, if you think about like the different industries in different towns, that kind of shifts the focus of people, particularly if you're not planning to go to college. Like if you live in a town that produces cars, for example, I feel like there would be more of a focus in that area of like grooming people as they're growing up and sort of teaching them about mechanics and things like that so that they're prepared to go into the workforce in the future.
Absolutely. Someone that's grown up on a farm is obviously more likely to gain skills like once they grew up on that farm. Whereas if you grew up in Northern Virginia, there is such a heavy IT business emphasis, politics emphasis in this area as well. And so kids are more likely to go into that, especially with parents working in the government roles like diplomats. So moving on to a different outcome in the natural sciences, there is the example of Jocelyn Bell Burnett. She was a student studying at Edinburgh University in 1967, and she discovered this weird sort of blip on the transcript surface of the telescope. Well, after investigating this further, it turned out to be the very first evidence of a pulsar. Pulsars are when a star collapses to a very small volume. The speed at which it rotates increases greatly, and as a result, they emit radiation almost like clockwork. These are very important for finding out where you are positioned in space, and also your time in space. And so, in 1974, 5 years later, her supervisor, Anthony Hewish, and another astronomer, Martin Ryle, received the Nobel Prize for the discovery of the pulsar. Well, there's a discrepancy here because it was actually Bell Burnell that discovered it herself. She did go on to receive many smaller awards, however, and even in 2018, last year, she was awarded a Breakthrough Prize for efforts in inspiring women in STEM. But again, we see here the efforts of cultural stereotypes and bias against women in STEM fields. Because women are discouraged, or were discouraged back in the 1970s and 60s from pursuing STEM and science, her results were not widely acknowledged by the rest of the community, and she was not awarded the Nobel Prize along with her male supervisors and male counterparts. This is a reflection, well, this goes back to the cycle of how less knowledge about women in STEM is provided to young women, and they're not as likely to go and pursue natural sciences areas. And my other example is in the alchemist in the arts. And we all know the song Old Town Road. It came out relatively recently. It's by Lil Nas X. And it is a unique blend of both country and rap music. However, this was removed from the Billboard of Hot Country Songs before it could reach another award position, where it was predicted to reach within a few weeks. Because it was also at the same time on the Hot R&B and Hip Hop chart. This created a controversy of the definition of music genres. Artie was said to be not embracing enough elements of today's country music to qualify as country music. And here again, we can see that the cultural stereotype of what a music genre has been, in this case, it's been defined as very hard and clear cut. And so this song did not make the cut of what make the cut of country music, even though it clearly uses a lot, heavily uses a lot of elements from both country and hip hop. And so the final question I'm going to bring to you guys to generate a bit more of a discussion is a bit more of a broad question. To what extent is our knowledge limited by the media we consume? The media in this case is a part of culture.
I think if we're going to talk about social media, there's like fake news, like the twisting of like what is actually happening. So I think that like limits our knowledge because we're not like being presented like the full truth, and like we're reading other people's like opinions and biases. So I think
Oh, I see. Like absolutely differing conservative versus liberal news outlets, right? News outlets, right? They tend to twist words to favor one side or the other.
Yeah, for example, like I follow this like liberal account on Instagram, and it's just constant like liberal posts, and sometimes it's a little overwhelming because I don't get both perspectives. So,
Yeah. Especially the internet, you have access to all these perspectives, and yet they tend to follow one or the other.
Yeah, you also, in the media, you specifically only surround yourself with what you're accustomed to, like advertising. Google collects all of your information and then it curates specifically what you want to see in your advertisements and your articles, which is why it's difficult to get a perspective, as you were saying, because they specifically do that to make you more interested in what they're presenting to you. And then in that sense, it is limited because you're not gaining a perspective on it, rather you're just reinforcing your ideas instead of nothing new that you're consuming.
Yeah.
And I guess that's an effect of media, and because if you're in a library and you just pick up a random book on the shelf, it's most likely not going to be something that you're familiar with. Whereas if you walk into Google, if you open up a Google search, you type anything, it's most likely going to be aligning with your belief because Google curates it in that specific way.
And
But-
that's.
oh sorry.
I was going to say, in that sense, it's not just media, but also like the internet, which is a reflection of the cultural views of the US. Everyone has a voice on the internet, and so it's sort of this massive collection of people, everyone's views meshed together. On the internet, the algorithms that they use are more inclined to give you results that you're citing instead of something new.
I was also gonna say, knowledge can also grow grow through the medias because, like they've said, if we go into a library and pick up a book, that book could have been published in the 1800s. I'm sure politics has changed since then. I know politics has changed since then. Let me rephrase that. So by using Instagram or Snapchat, we can give our voice too, as well, especially in like this day and age, when what we're doing is really important to like the country.
Yeah, and even in books published long ago, only certain authors, like well-known or wealthy people, were able to publish books years ago. And so, from a historical perspective, our view of culture back then and the way it influenced the knowledge created back then is heavily skewed by the types of people that authored books.
I mean, but like in theory, if I know that like in theory, like the media that we consume is limiting our knowledge because we're not exposing ourselves to different views of media. But at the same time, shouldn't it also be expanding our knowledge? Because like any new media or anything new that we perceive, any new experience is going to produce new knowledge in some way.
And yeah, you're definitely drawing back to argument two that I presented previously, which is that instead of restricting our view, we're essentially pushing through and expanding our knowledge in a certain area. Yeah, I agree, definitely.
I feel that it's not just like media that's necessarily limiting our knowledge though, because I think that especially in today's world, so much media and content exists that you could find like information on basically anything that you're interested in. So I think that in some ways I might argue it's more like culturally talked about before, the societies that we live in or even who we're raised by that actually limits or affects our knowledge, because if we wanted certain information like from the media, we could go out and get it, but ultimately our surroundings are kind of what is determining the information that we seek out.
Yeah, and so in that sense, you're sort of creating the argument that more real biases and norms that are expressed by people around us are influencing the way we gain knowledge, and the careers we go into, the things we pursue on the internet, ways we can gain knowledge. All right, well that discussion pretty much done, so that's the end of my presentation.
How much time do you have left?
There is 4 minutes left.
Let's use it.
Okay.
I mean, so we can clap now for him because you were about to. What are you exploring that our cultures, whether that's a culture of gender, a culture of geographic location, wherever that may be, affect us, is pretty obvious. Why do we allow the internet to shape what we think or know? Why do we allow Google to I mean, that's a tougher question. But what is your idea about why we allow these cultures to affect the way that we think?
Well, all of that is social conformity and like the bandwagon effect, where people tend to not want to be different from those around them. Especially, you see this evident in things like fashion trends or fashion trends. I'll go with that example. Same with music trends as well. When something popular, when we think that something is popular amongst many people, we as humans will want to follow that trend and associate with it and think of it as well.
Yeah, because you can see like a huge designer, Louis Vuitton or whatever, like they'll create something, but not everyone can buy it Louis Vuitton. So then other like fast fashion brands, like Forever 21 or H&M or something, they'll try to create it so that way everybody can have it almost, I guess. So then that way, I guess that knowledge of fashion trends not only limited to one section of or like one group of people. Whereas if you have like in business, it's like we were talking about like marketing and branding and how like some companies like Louis Vuitton, those are luxury companies, those are made for like one specific group. Whereas like H&M that can be bought by everybody.
So then think about what she's saying about culture itself. If we have just a uniculture approach to knowledge, there's a male version and a female version of how we approach STEM. We obviously see how that limits us. So let's try to explore that knowledge question a little bit more. Let's have you do that.
Okay.
What are we learning about how we can have culture influence us differently, knowing the limitations of culture on our knowledge now?
I mean, culture is sort of an expression of many different perspectives across the West, and this is definitely true of the internet. But I'm gonna go back to the idea of the internet, having all these people expressing their opinions at the same time from different perspectives. Yes, everyone gets a voice, but doesn't everyone get listened to? And this is sort of contrasted with like the government, where old white men have the greatest voice, obviously, as they're most free to be, and yet they don't share the same knowledge and experiences as many of the other people that their constituents they represent. And so this definitely affects our knowledge as a nation and as a culture, because if less people believe in climate change, then there is not as much pushing towards evidence and results from the climate change studies. And yes, we can see that it's limiting us, our information that we get, because if as a collection, many people don't believe in climate change, or we think that many people don't believe in climate change, it's gonna affect whether we do studies towards it. But this can also, in a way, further our knowledge, because it's going to inspire other studies that instead might try and disprove it, and by disproving it, they are still creating a form of knowledge, new knowledge from it.
Mr. Rose, I want to go back to your question earlier about why do we let Google curate our preferences? I think that's a really interesting question, and I feel that no matter what we do, even if we try to defy the way that Google curates the information by randomly searching things or changing your preferences, there's no real way to do it. Because I think a really related statement to your presentation is you are what you eat. It's not just like, obviously you're not eating, but you're consuming media. But when you're a kid, as much as you don't want to listen to your parents, or you don't conform to their beliefs, or you don't agree with them, you're still influenced by them, and a lot of your ideas are made from them. The culture doesn't necessarily make you agree with them, but when you disagree, you are being formed by the culture. No matter what you say, oh, I don't agree with them, therefore I'm independent, not necessarily because it's binary. You either agree or you don't.
You're making a decision, like a conscious
You're making a
decision
conscious decision to
not
disagree.
agree with them.
And so
In that sense, you are affected by culture.
and then even more so your local culture, or like the influence that your family, stereotypes that your family has, or your friends have, and your teachers.
I think an interesting thing you could explore, and you're out of time, but
That's fine.
how your choice is actually non-existent when it comes to culture.
Yeah, with the influences of culture and forcing choices.
That is where I was trying to lead him. Well done. Thank you. Alright, that's you, ST. Alright, however you'd like to do it, you can circle what level you think each of the 5 elements that Ben dealt with are. But ultimately, what I'd like you to do is just circle one number at the bottom. Don't be doing this 6.5 thing, 2.5. Yep, so just delete that and then click on it. Actually, sorry.